Our guest today is saxophonist and composer Jon Gordon, a native New Yorker whose career spans decades of remarkable collaborations and accolades, including winning the Thelonious Monk International Jazz Saxophone Competition, with credits alongside legends like Phil Woods, Maria Schneider, Aretha Franklin, and Jimmy Cobb. Jon has performed at major festivals and venues worldwide. His critically acclaimed recordings continue to push jazz's boundaries, and we are live. So, Jon, thanks for being here. Good to see you.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
Yeah. So we were just talking a little bit before we started recording. Some of the musicians I named. You had just gotten to play with them, a handful of times. But I guess a good place to start would be the collaborations for you. Would you would not be the musician and person you are today without whether they were mentorships. Who comes to mind?
Well, when I got to high school, when I was 13 in 1980 at Performing Arts High School, I met Bill Charlap. And so he was a very important collaborator and we're still very close and we talk all the time. And you know how it is with your friends, sometimes they're more like brothers and family than just friends. And he's somebody I love dearly and I'm very, very proud of. He played on a couple of my earlier records, and then we did a duo record together that was actually at the suggestion of Phil Woods. We were at Phil Woods' home one day. I don't remember why I was there without my saxophone. And Phil was like, "Why don't you play my horn? You know what? I've been thinking about like recording, producing you guys doing a duo record." And we were like, "Oh, okay." And so we just recorded at Phil's house, I don't know, within a year or so. I did have my own instrument that day. And then I think there was a couple things where I felt like the soprano sound I didn't love, so we went back out a day or two later, and there's a very good studio out there called Red Rock Recording Studios. Um, Great Kent Heckman is the engineer, and I had recorded there with Phil for something else. But I think Phil is one of my important collaborators. I think subbing for many years with the Vanguard Jazz Orchestra, subbing quite a bit with Maria for about 15 years. Some sideman things I got to do. I got to play when I was 21 about 10 concerts with Red Rodney. That was really exciting for me at the time. Though I was not the multi-instrumentalist that he normally had in Dick Oates and he would later have with Chris Potter. So I was like borrowing a tenor and a tenor mouthpiece, and I just, Chris could sit down and play probably the whole set on piano, and but yeah, there's a lot of people like that along the way. Many collaborators I could think of. A wonderful writer, had a wonderful big band in New York for some years, Bill Mobley. We recorded at Smalls, and we did something else at Smoke. Um, so yeah, there's been quite a few over the years.
Do you find yourself giving younger players, certain opportunities, or if you see something in them, you might, pull them aside? So as far as mentoring or teaching goes, is there anyone like that, people that you've helped along the way, you think?
Well, yeah, I mean, I got incredible mentoring. I always say I feel like I'm as lucky as anybody I've ever met in that way. Eddie Locke was one of my musical fathers. I mean, and the three most important musicians in his life when he came to New York. I mean, he's from Detroit, so he had all the Detroit people like Tommy Flanagan, Hank Jones and Thad and Elvin, and he was very close with Barry Harris. And so he comes to New York with a drummer named Oliver Jackson, and they basically are kind of adopted by Papa Joe Jones. And they live with him for a couple of years, and so his three musical fathers were Papa Joe Jones, Coleman Hawkins, and Roy Eldridge. And so I got to know Eddie from, um, he was teaching a friend of mine at Performing Arts High School. And then he was coming to our gigs and sitting in and hiring some of us for things. So him, Phil, there was a great tenor player in New York named Eddie Chambly, and I could go on and on about like all the musicians in that band and people that used to sub. Benny Powell would come down there. James Moody came down once. And so a lot of that. Doc Cheatham I used to play with a little bit on Sundays at Sweet Basil's. Eddie Chambly's gig was Saturday afternoons at Sweet Basil. So I got all this incredible support and mentoring. Um, I just spoke last night with like just a truly great tenor player that I taught a little bit at Purchase named Sam Dillon, and he's basically very close with Andrew Gould, who's a great alto player, and they actually have a two saxophone group. Um, yeah, I mean, I'm very
He'll be on the podcast in like 2 weeks. Andrew will actually. So
okay.
yeah,
Good.
it's a small world, I guess it goes to say, right?
Well, yeah, and they're both great players. There's a wonderful tenor player from Brazil named Olivia Almeida that I met probably 20 years ago now, give or take. He came to New York from Brazil, and he was a student of mine at City College. Yeah, I had wonderful students at the New School, City College, Purchase, but I had a prof gig at Purchase for 4 years, and I was subbing up there for quite a bit. So that's where I met some 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 of those folks. And there's been some wonderful folks I've worked with here where I teach now in Winnipeg at the University of Manitoba. Jocelyn Gould uh, studied with me during her postdoc before she went to Michigan State and got her master's there. Great guitarist and vocalist that's having an amazing career. Joanna Majoko, another great vocalist that I worked in some ensembles. Um, yeah, Tatjana Harrischuk is a great drummer and composer. That so a lot of really great musicians have come through this program as well. That I'm glad I got a chance to work with.
When did you move up to Canada? What year was it?
About 11 and a half years ago, it was basically fall of 2013. I still have a place in New York. I kind of go back and forth, but yeah, and I still like I have some students that I see from various places around the world, often on Zoom or sometimes in person. But yeah, I'm basically in my 12th year teaching here, and yeah.
Well, you must enjoy it. I mean, to stay well over 10 years. How did that opportunity come to be? Like, just something opened up or they reached out to you?
Somebody reached out to me and said, "Would you come up and interview?" And basically, I wasn't looking to make that big of a life change, but the reality was, I felt like if I was going to be able to help put my two sons through college, I was just going to have to make more money, is what it came down to. But I think my biggest joy and my biggest blessing from being here, along with just, you know, doing what I needed to do and taking care of my responsibilities with my kids was working with some of the students here and just seeing just great people, seeing them do really well. Some people that graduated around the time I arrived. You might also know Curtis Noasa, the great drummer.
Yeah, I
I've
know who
worked
he is. Hmm.
here and done some touring with him here and done some gigs with him in New York. He's played on some of my gigs. I mean, we've had, a couple dozen really high level musicians in the program in the dozen years I've been here that have gone on and done stuff. And what I always say to our students, like prospectively that are, maybe looking to come here, our folks do stuff. They don't kind of just like muddle around, like they actually get stuff together. Like I'm also very proud of the folks that go on to be very high level teachers. One of my former students, Zachary Rushing, is a very talented vocalist. He's also the artistic director of Jazz Winnipeg, and
Oh,
which
wow.
is not only the Winnipeg Jazz Festival, but books other concerts throughout the year. Gareth Rice, who's a very talented composer and pianist, also a great jazz DJ. So that's what I love because we need all of it, right?
Yeah, I feel like that any serious jazz musician, when it comes to the education system, they're always going to have their criticisms about certain programs or things that they believe should be different. I think everyone would have something to say about some specific institution or whatnot. So, as far as like what you knew you wanted to bring to the program that you thought was vital for the students to be able to excel, were there any ideas that came to mind when you first took the job?
Well, I think what I mostly have to offer is the fact that I am the beneficiary of all that mentoring and generosity that I got.
Mhm.
So that's basically I don't know, my inner mindset about it. Like I just feel like I got a lot, like you need lessons? Okay, I'm gonna get you free lessons. You need a horn? I'll help you out. Like that's basically That's how I got treated because I basically I didn't come from a situation that was, middle class or upper middle class, or I pretty much didn't have anything. So all my teachers and my friends' families, so everybody's like, okay, you need a place, you need food, so that's a little bit like my mindset. And I think also karmically, it's just like I'm not thinking in the grand scheme of things, I'm paying anything back. But I remember what Phil Wood said to me when I studied with him. I think it was the third or fourth lesson. One of his mentors had passed away the night before, named Bud Johnson, and he and Kim Parker. You may know that Kim Parker was both his stepdaughter and Charlie Parker's stepdaughter because he married Chan Parker after Bird died. But so he and Kim would come and pick me up at the bus stop, and one day she was like, "We tried to call and cancel, we couldn't get through. I was staying with friends. Bud Johnson died last night," and it was a real pivotal thing because Phil, like he said, was up all night basically in mourning.
Yeah.
And he turned around in the car and he just looked at me. He's like, I know too many people that have given their life for this music. If you don't know why you're doing this, you better love it. If you don't know why you're doing this, don't come in my house.
Yeah. I gave a
And I was
master
like,
class at a university about a year ago, and I sat down with all the students and I was like, the only reason you people should be here is if you just love it that much, because you should not, like, that's the only reason. That's number one, not about, anything
yeah,
else.
yeah. And Phil, that was about a 12-hour day. It was literally like 11 in the morning till 11 at night. And we just
Wow.
hung and hung and hung. And there were things he asked me to do that I could kind of do. Play me the opening of the Rite of Spring on the piano. Follow the score to Petrushka and show me where we're at. Go write a rondo. I'll be back in 20 minutes. Stuff like that. That I saw. It's like, what's the form of a rondo? And he's like, ABA. I was like, okay. So like, and he just kept throwing things at me. And like, I don't know, 10 something at night. He's like, play me Bird solo break on a 19 each. I was like, I don't think I can do it. Play it. And I just tried and I stumbled and he just cracked up and he put his arm around me. He's like, I'm taking you in. I'm taking one more of you young cats in. Don't let me down and don't get cocky. I said, okay, okay. So like, like I can't even explain. So he said, you never pay me again. That's it. You just come when you want to come and when you have something together. Like that's the kind of generosity that I got treated with. And he always said, pass it on, you know.
I wonder, does that generosity exist like that anymore? I mean, that's like another level of generosity. I mean, it's very rare these days. Everyone is just, society has changed in that way. And, these are the masters who pioneered the music.
It was so common for me, like as a teenager.
Hmm.
It's crazy, right? I'm talking about 40 years ago because I'm 58. It was so common. And I think sometimes I walk around, I'm like, I feel people are a little bit siloed off information wise and just also emotionally, and they're kind of protecting their little. I don't think that's where it's at to me because I wasn't, Eddie Chambly wasn't like that. Doc Cheatham wasn't like that. Milt Hinton wasn't like that. I remember I was playing a gig that was a little bit, it wasn't like super out, but there was some stuff that was a little bit out on the gig. I was 24 years old and Milt Hinton was there and he came up to me on the break. He's like, yeah, man, keep doing what you're doing. It sounds beautiful. You keep doing your thing. I mean, you know what I'm saying? Because you wouldn't expect musicians like that, of that era, that generation, maybe to think like that. But I'll give you one going back the opposite way. When I was 21, I met Jan Garbarek at Rainbow Studio in Oslo. Many of the great ECM records were recorded there. He was there finishing up, like, I think they were doing post-production with Manfred Eicher on an ECM record. And there was a delay, and my producer was upset. But the positive for me is I got to hang with Jan Garbarek for like 90 minutes. And I said, man, could I take a lesson with you? Oh, well, I could never teach anyways. Very self-deprecating, Scandinavian, quiet. I said, I just was listening to two records of yours. One was like a solo saxophone with wind harp on a beach, and the other one was with a children's choir. And like, man, this was so like very personal and original. And what inspires you? He said, every day I get up and I listen to Johnny Hodges and Ben Webster, and my all-time favorite saxophone player is Eddie Lockjaw Davis. Now, Eddie Chambly, who did not sound anything like Jan Garbarek, is basically like kind of a generation removed from Coleman Hawkins with a very strong blues influence. That's the guy he always talked about. And Jimmy Lewis was the great bass player that played in that band, Lockjaw. They loved Lockjaw. And Paul Gonsalves was another one that I remember talking with Eddie Chambly about it and talking about the conception they had to play the instrument and to think musically and with their lines. And so that's something that's one of the reasons I think, I don't know, I just love the whole history of the music, and I love that kind of appreciation for various parts of its history from people you might not expect based on what they did.
Yeah, and I love too when musicians who don't sound anything like each other collaborate. Like if they have a
Mhm.
totally two different approaches to improvisation, but they play together in the same band. I feel like that's one of the, one of the best things to listen to.
You know, you just put me in mind of there's a record that Monk did that Coleman Hawkins and Train are on together. And towards the end of Coleman Hawkins's life, Eddie Locke used to go to his house. The last couple of years, I think he just kind of was not really going out anymore. I think he was just, I don't know how you would just describe it, but he was not performing. He was just kind of, and so um, the two other people he talked about going there with on a few occasions, and he had hundreds of photos, was Cannonball Adderley and Monk. And Monk loved Coleman because Coleman Hawkins was basically the first really established jazz musician that saw Thelonious and really appreciated him. And he hired him for his first record date. And Thelonious never forgot that.
Even
And
too,
so,
like you listen to this interview with John Coltrane, and they ask him who he likes, and he's like, "Yeah, I love Sonny Rollins," and two completely different personalities. But it's almost like, I mean, I come from the jazz guitar world where it's like they're more compartmentalized, and like if you play with more traditional, then you won't give someone who's more modern the credit. But everyone has their own approach, and that's the beauty.
absolutely. I love musicians that I hear the whole history in their playing. When I heard Joe Henderson live as a teenager at the Vanguard with Ron Carter and Al Foster, I realized, like, okay, this guy is a genius. Like, that's the first
Yeah.
thing I felt. But also you could hear the whole history in his playing. I feel like Sonny Rollins is like that. I feel like, some of my favorite, Lovano I feel is like that. One of my favorite musicians that I want people to know about, who I think is somebody that does the whole history of the music and is always true to himself in doing it, Scott Robinson. Are you hip to Scott Robinson?
I probably should be, but now I have to do my
Scott
homework.
Scott is maybe most known now as the baritone player in Maria Schneider's uh, orchestra. And I think I first met and worked with Scott in maybe 91,
Hmm.
92. Just brilliant human being, total original, plays about 70 instruments. I mean, like I don't know how to describe it to you. And I said, how do you practice? He's like, I don't practice them all. I know I got about 5 or 6 choruses of a blues in my brass chops, and then it's gone, you know. But he's got it, and and he plays, and so for me, like I love everything from Roy Eldridge to Alan Holdsworth. I mean, I love, you know what I mean? I love all of it. And I think yeah, I mean, I again, to
I
that
know,
point of,
I love hearing that though, because the like we were talking about before, the how everyone has their different approaches, and some of them can kind of condescend each other in their circles, I think is just ridiculous.
agreed.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, what did Duke say? It's all music, it either speaks to you, it's music to you, or it isn't, or, whatever works for you. But I like the transcendence of those kinds of boundaries. And I think, Duke spoke to that. And I believe he said the highest compliment you can pay is that something is beyond category, I believe, or words to that effect.
Wow. Yeah, though this John, this is great. Before we wrap up, kind of let us know, the audience know what's on the schedule and itinerary for you in the upcoming year. Are there certain things you're excited about this year? Because we're
Yeah,
spring is here now. So what's on the books?
I let's see. I have 2 weeks of teaching basically left here. I have some gigs with my friend Fabio Rognelli, who's a great drummer that was in New York for some time, originally from Toronto. He's teaching with us here. We have a couple of gigs and a recording. I have a week-long run at the Rex in Toronto, or four-night run, I guess you would say, most of a week. That'll be fun. That's May 7th through 10th. I'll be back in New York a little bit in mid-May. Then I'm going to England for a run of some gigs and teaching. And then I'll be at the Deerhead Inn in Delaware Water Gap, Pennsylvania, right, literally right down the hill from Phil's house with Phil's piano in the club. And I'll be at the Roxy. Those two gigs will be in June. So that's kind of what's coming up the next couple of months. And for the rest of the summer, I'm not sure, but I've released two kind of nonet slash 10-set records here. One last year called 7th Avenue South, and one in 2021 called Stranger Than Fiction. And I'm hoping to, I have several more writing projects that I'm hoping to get very disciplined about, finishing a big band record, writing for various large and small ensembles that I'm hoping to record and release over the next 3 to 5 years, basically.
No, no, John, sounds like your plate is full in a good way. But so just want to say thank you for, taking the time to speak with me today. Really, really appreciate it.
My pleasure.